All right, we've talked about a lot of different things that make people happy and that make people wise. Can you think about some of those things that Jesus said makes people happy in the very first part of Matthew chapter 5? Okay, yeah, being poor in spirit. It's interesting to me, that's the first one. He said, let me tell you what makes people really happy, and he said, it's humility. You know, we wouldn't normally think of that. The world teaches you just push people out of the way to climb to the top. But Jesus said, that's not it at all. All right, what about being hungry and thirsty? Being hungry and thirsty for what? Righteousness. For righteousness. He said, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. All these things are connected with what makes people happy. Now, we concluded on Thursday night about verse 20, talking about the Old Testament law. Okay, so apologize just for a second. I'm going to speed up a little bit and catch up talking about the Old Testament law. Now, you and I both know that there are many places in the New Testament that teach today we don't live under that law. Is that true or false? That's true. But there's some statements here that Jesus made that are very interesting to me if that is the case. Okay? So let's take a look here for just a minute and notice verse 17. Okay, look at Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. And I want to pick out some highlights just to see what you think about this. He said, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Now here it is. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now wait a minute. If the New Testament teaches that we don't live under the Old Testament law anymore, what does Jesus mean by that? I think about one man, I think it was Mark Twain. In fact, he said a friend of his told Mark Twain, he said, Mark, my main goal is to go to the Holy Land and recite the 10 Commandments. And Mark looked at him and said, well, why don't you just stay here and try to keep them? Is it still right to obey the command, thou shalt do no murder? Is it still right to keep the command, thou shalt not commit adultery? Thou shalt not steal? Honor your father and your mother? It is. But I'll tell you something, it's still right because it's always been right. Even before the law of Moses was given, it was always right to do those things. Now, I'll share with you my thoughts on what I believe Jesus is talking about here when he begins this next section. Okay? Look at verse 20. For I say unto you, now keep in mind, he's fixing to repeat that statement over and over. I say unto you. All right, he will tell them, you've heard this before, but here's what I'm saying right now. For I say to you, except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now, Jesus has a problem with the scribes and the Pharisees, okay? Can you think of some of those problems? What are the problems that Jesus is having with the religious people of his day? All right, we're fixing to get into this pretty heavy, but here's what they do. They think because they look good on the outside that everybody believes that they're good on the inside. And that's not true. So here's what they do. They increase all these commands. You know, in fact, I've heard that there are 600 some odd commands that they have added to the Old Testament law that God did not require. So Jesus has a problem with them, and he says, your religion is all about a show. When the truth is, he said on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. He called them wolves in sheep's clothing on one occasion. Now notice verse 21, okay? You have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill. Whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, there it is. So in my opinion, when you back up to verse 19, when he says, whosoever shall break one of these least commandments shall be least in the kingdom of heaven, I believe that he's talking about the 10 commandments of the old law, but I also believe that he's taken these commands even a step further. You see, he said, you've heard by them of old time, thou shalt not kill. Well, it's still wrong to kill. So whether they're breaking it under the law of Moses or whether they're breaking it because it's just wrong, it's still wrong either way. So I do not believe there is a contradiction there at all. I just believe that Jesus is mentioning the principles under the Old Testament law and says, you've still got to keep those principles. Because it's still wrong to kill. It's still wrong to commit adultery. It's still wrong to do all these things. All right, what are your thoughts? All right. I'm reminded of a story of a couple who was married for 35 years. They thought they were going to plan their retirement and they're going to buy a new home somewhere on a fancy lake. And anyway, they had this realtor that was helping them. His name was Ben. Ben was showing them all these different homes and they were so excited. But you know, the wife was not really happy. She began to like Ben. In fact, after a couple of months of them looking around at houses, she left her husband and went and lived with Ben. And 3 weeks later, Ben died of a heart attack. And she was all alone. You know, I guess the point is of what Jesus is teaching these people, the grass is never greener on the other side. Never. You know, it's funny to me how you'll pass a pasture driving down the road and you see that cow with all the green grass around, but he has his head through the barbed wire fence eating on the outside of the fence. And I believe what Jesus is teaching through the rest of this chapter is he said, look, this is what you have heard and this is what I'm saying unto you. This is the best way. The grass is not greener anywhere else. This is the way that life is supposed to be lived. So notice, he says, you have heard by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, verse 21. Whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. Now look, chapter 5, verse 22. But I say unto you, whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. You know, I think about what John said in the book of 1 John when he said, whoso hateth his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer hath eternal life abiding in him. I mean, this is serious. Like, Jesus is taking this far beyond what the Old Testament taught. I mean, if somebody were killed and they wanted justice, what would you do for justice under the old law if someone were killed? You'd hunt them down, wouldn't you? Moses said it was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. In fact, this principle was so scary that God allowed for 6 cities to be named as cities of refuge. So that if a man accidentally killed another man, he could run to one of those 6 cities and seek refuge. And as long as he stayed in that city, God said he will not die. But God also said, if he left, guess what the family could do? the family could catch him outside the gates of that city and they could kill him. That was the law under the Old Testament. If you kill somebody, you'll be killed. But Jesus said, you don't have to be out in the woods with an axe and the axe fly off the handle and hit somebody in the head by accident to kill him. Jesus said, all you have to do is just be angry with him for no reason. That's pretty serious. Notice as he continues, he said, whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka. Now, I looked this word up. It's pretty interesting, the meaning of what's going on here. Okay, so I looked this up, and if you want to go back and reference it for another time, it is in your Strong's Concordance. It's number 4469. It literally means worthless one. Worthless one. So he said, if a man shall say to his brother that he is worthless, he'll be in danger of the council. But if he says he is a fool, okay, I looked this word up. It's found other places in the New Testament. Even God used this word. It means stupid and foolish. But he said, if you call your brother a fool, then you will be in danger of hellfire. I'll be honest with you, there is a theme that I'm seeing in the New Testament more today than I have ever seen in my life. It is so important what I think about you. And I knew it before. I knew this before. But I don't know why. In the last year or so, this has really jumped off the pages. And I was preparing a lesson this week, and I began at the beginning of the week, and it was not fitting together for me, so I ended up changing it. But I am going to come back to that. But it's interesting to me in Philippians chapter 2, I began a series on the book of Philippians, and I already preached from chapter 1, so I moved into chapter 2 in the very first 6 verses. And that was my lesson for this week. And it's interesting to me how he said, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Now, I'm not going to preach to you my sermon, but I'm just going to share with you how important I thought this was. He said, we've got to consider one another. We can't have strife and vainglory and all these other things. So if I'm going to be like Christ, then I've got to listen to what he says here. All right. Somebody said, why did the lion spit out the clown? Well, because he tasted funny. When I thought about that principle, I thought, I don't want to be the lion. What did Peter say a lion does? He walks about, what? Seeing who he can devour and destroy. I thought about the lesson from Philippians 2, and I thought, I do not want to be the lion. That's what Jesus is teaching. We've got to be careful. And there are times, you may catch me on a bad day, and I tell you, I apologize for that. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be rude. And I promise you, if I am ever mean or rude, I will make it right. I may catch you on a bad day. You may be in a bad mood. Okay, we understand that. But I've got to think deep in my heart right now. I want you to think. Is there someone in your life that you know you need to reconcile things with? Maybe this has been going on for years. Maybe it's a member of the family, maybe your brother or sister, and you had a big fight at Christmas time 5 years ago or something like that. I have found in these principles that things like this are very, very important. He's teaching about reconciliation. All right, let's continue. Look at verse 23. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way, and first be reconciled. Be reconciled to thy brother. and then come and offer thy gift. I have heard people say, and you probably have too, when you say, you know what, we'd love to have you come back to church and be with us again. Or you may go to somebody and say, well, what happened? You know, what made you leave? Have you ever heard somebody say, so-and-so did this or that, and I ain't never coming back? I think this Jesus is considering this so important because he said, the way that I look at other people, the way that I treat other people, the way that I feel about other people can directly affect whether or not they will decide to have a relationship with the Lord. Of course, there's a lot of other things included as well, but that is a huge one. Okay, let's go to some passages here. Let's go to Luke chapter 6. Verses 35 through 37, okay? Luke chapter 6, verses 35 through 37. How many of you have young children right now? You have young children at home? Do your children fight? I thought mine were just abnormal because they fight all the time. I mean, I cannot keep them apart most days. But I began to learn, you know, that's pretty typical for kids. Me and my brothers were 4 years apart. So I had a younger brother than me and then my older brother. And we had times when we almost killed each other. But we also, a lot of the time, we went our separate ways. Like we were just the right amount of years apart from each other that we didn't really care to be around each other. Now, the closer they get in age, it's a little bit different. You know, they're buddies, but at times they fight a lot. But I will tell you something I've noticed in my oldest two, in Josiah and Maylee, just recently, is they began to pair up a lot. Okay? And now my youngest two, they just fight with everybody. No matter what age it is, but you know, lately they began to pair up and they'll go out and tromp around in these woods over here, ride their bikes around the parking lot and stuff like that. And you know, I have to check on them a little while, but for the most part, they can stick together. Occasionally they'll come in and fight, but it's interesting to me, no matter what age, you know, I've got 4, 6, 8, and 10. No matter what age, they'll be fighting 1 minute, and then what'll be happening the next minute? They'll be playing again. And they don't really mention what happened 10 minutes ago. It's completely gone out of their minds. You know, they just go about their business. They just keep doing whatever they were doing before. And, you know, things are good for the most part. They may come in with something else a little bit later, but children are so good at what Jesus is talking about. But as we get older, it gets a lot harder, doesn't it? As adults, we like to hold grudges. That's something that kids don't have the ability to do. You know, and what you'll find, even in the foster care system, is maybe you have a teenager who has been beaten or something, been abused by her family. And she will still want to be with her family. Why is that? Because that's her family. Even though it's not good for her to be there, the system is good in saying, no, you're in danger if you go back home because it's not fit for you to be there. You will find a lot of times the children, they still want to be at home because they are the most forgiving creatures in the world. And as adults, Jesus had to preach and say, don't hold a grudge. You know, just let all that go. Okay? Yeah, this person was in a bad mood. They probably hurt you. They said some things they shouldn't have said. Well, let's fix it and get on with it. You know, yeah, there's a family problem. There's somebody's acting in a way they're not supposed to. But guess what? They're probably not going to change. Okay? Let's just say, all right, we're going to move on from this. Well, it's hard not to hold grudges. All right, let's look at Luke chapter 6, verse 35 through 37. Will somebody please read that for us?
But love your enemies, do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the unthankful and evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven.
Okay. That is the hardest teaching in the world, just about. I mean, everything that Jesus has taught up to this point is so difficult, and then he puts this stipulation on it. I'll tell you, it's not easy to be a Christian. And it's because of principles like this. You mean that I have to be nice to the guy that wants to kill me? Yeah. It's interesting to me, too, this word love, when he said to love your enemies. That literally means that not only do I have to be kind to people that don't like me, I've got to do good things for them. If they ever came to me and said, hey, can I borrow your trailer because we're moving? Guess what Jesus wants me to do? He don't want me to stand at the front door and say, you think I'm going to let you use my trailer? After everything that you said and after everything you did, do you really think that I'm going to let you do that? Jesus says, even a little bit later, not only do I have to give him my trailer, but I need to go with him and help him load it. He said, if he asked you to go 1 mile, how many miles do we need to go? You go 2. That's not for my friend. Now, that's easy to do for my friend. No, Jesus said, that's what you do for your enemy. And I'll be honest with you, that's tough. It's hard to do what Jesus is saying. All right, let's keep reading. Look here at verse 25. He said, agree with your adversary quickly, while thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and thou judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Now, Jesus is directly talking about how Christians deal with the government. And he said, you don't want to put yourself in a bad place with the rulers that are over you. Somebody once said, don't bite the hand that feeds you. The government could put you in jail, he said. And Jesus knows that the government is about to be upset with everything that Jesus is teaching. They're not going to like this. And he says, you want to be in good standing with the government. All right. I think of this passage, Ephesians 4:31. He said, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, evil speaking be put away from among you with all malice, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. So I think that right there sort of sums up everything that we've mentioned thus far. All right, let's move on down. Look at verse 27. You have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Now you think about the seriousness of what Jesus is fixing to say. He said, if your right eye offends you, pluck it out. And cast it as far from you as you possibly can. Because it's better that one of your members perish than that your whole body be cast into hell. And he said, if your right hand offends you, cut it off. Cast it as far from you as you can. And then he mentions the same idea there.
But that's a figure of speech.
It is a figure of speech, yeah. We don't want to go around. Yeah, it's true. You don't want to crank up the chainsaw, okay? That would just be crazy. But there is a principle here. Jesus is talking about some of the most deep and serious things on earth. I mean, think about murder. That's pretty deep. But I wonder if you went to jail and you talked to some of these people that have committed murder, how many of them were in their teen years and said to themselves, you know, one day I'm going to kill somebody. I mean, my dream is just to murder someone. I have an idea that they would not say that. But you know what they did? They followed the devil for so long. He led them right to it. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of them are just crazy. I mean, you'd have to be crazy to kill someone. But you think about it. Some of them are not even in their right mind. You know, they can't even function in society. But picture a man who gets addicted to methamphetamine in his early 20s. He goes to pick up some drugs, and he's going to rob the drug dealer. He doesn't intend to kill him. But something happens, and the drug dealer jumps on him, and he has to, and he kills him. If you were to talk to him and ask him before all that happened, before he got addicted to methamphetamine, if he ever thought he was going to kill someone, he would say no. This is a deep thing. This is a weird, deep conversation that Jesus is talking about people who kill. And he said, you don't have to pull the trigger to kill someone. All you have to do is hate them. He said, you don't have to lay in the bed with somebody to commit adultery either. He said, all you got to do is lust after them. I'll be honest with you, there are some positions that I have wondered about. I tend to like to take the safest position there is. There's a situation in the Lord's church where someone had divorced because their spouse was addicted to looking at pornography. And they were remarried. And the question was, is their marriage scriptural or is it unscriptural? My first initial thought, when the question was asked me, I thought, well, no, Jesus said, except it be for what? Fornication. But another preacher long ago had met with them and told them this scripture right here. He said, if a man lusts after a woman, he has already done what? He's already committed adultery. Now, my position initially is say, no, fornication is an act. Okay, it has to be an act. But I'll be honest with you, I haven't changed my position, but I'll tell you what I've done. I have rethought it. And if I ever come across that situation ever again, I'll be careful what I say to them. I'll tell them, here's what I think about the situation. But you're going to have to decide for yourself whether or not your marriage is unscriptural or not. Because I don't know. I do not know. Now, I just pray to God, I hope that most of us, all of us, would never be in a situation like that. But sometimes there are weird things that you come across in the Lord's church. This is one of them. As a preacher, you get asked some really, really tough questions, and questions like this to say, you know, is my marriage scriptural or is it unscriptural? My first initial thought would be, I would say, to be safe, no. But then I begin to wonder. The intent is there. If a man is looking at pornography, he is intending to cheat on his wife. If a woman is looking at pornography, she is intending to cheat on her husband. And I think that's why Jesus is saying this. The intent is there. Now, let's say you go to the beach or whatever, which is probably not a good idea, but you go out to the beach, you see people in their bathing suits, and a man is lusting after a woman, but his wife is sitting right here. Did he intend to do that? No, he didn't intend to do that. But pornography is not that way. The intent is purposeful. So, That's things you run into. It's a strange deal. It's a deep thing. But Jesus says it is very serious. He said, you don't have to lay in the bed with somebody to commit adultery. No, all you have to do is lust after them. So, this teaching that Jesus is teaching, it's not easy. I mean, you think about it. He begins with some of the hardest things in the world, and he said, but I'll tell you what they'll do. They'll make you happy. Then he moves on to these types of things, and he said, you are the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. It's not easy to be a leader in the world. Then he said, you don't have to murder a man to kill him. No, all you have to do is hate him. Then he said, you don't have to lay in the bed to commit adultery. You just got to lust after him. Now notice verse 31. I think he clears up the muddy water here. He said, it hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. Was that taught in the Old Testament? Yeah. In fact, you can read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 24. When God told Moses, if a man does not find what he wants in his wife, he can give her a writing of divorcement and put her away. Now, in my opinion, here's why God allowed that, because it was such a problem. I don't believe that God said, yes, you can divorce your spouse for any reason. No, they were already divorcing their spouses for a bunch of reasons. And God said to Moses, you need to get control on this. Everybody is just divorcing everybody. So God gave him instructions on how to handle that. He said, you make them fill out documents and you make them document this thing. And they're going to do it at least through a court system. That's Deuteronomy 24 in the first 5 verses. So Jesus said, yes, you have heard by them of old time, let her give a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of what? Fornication. That's right. For fornication. All right. Let me ask you a question. What is the difference between adultery and fornication? One would take place when a person is married, right? We call that adultery. But the word fornication is unique. It includes adultery. You see, adultery is a type of fornication. I looked at this word here and I wanted to share with you. It says this, harlotry, this is fornication. Harlotry, including adultery and incest. It is basically any illicit act. Okay? Adultery is a specific illicit act. And there are differences between the two. All right. Can you think of some men in the Bible whose downfall was this? It's the first one I always think of. David always comes to my mind. You know, Job said, I have made a covenant with my eyes that I should not think upon a maid. Job, and all the scriptures in Job are the oldest scriptures that we have available. This book is 4,000 years old at least. That is old. That's a long time. This has been an age-old problem since the beginning of time. And Job said, even way back when, he said, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Think about David. David sent messengers and he took her and she came into him and he lay with her. That was his biggest downfall. That moment right there destroyed David. Not only did he have a child that died out of wedlock, but God told David from this point on that I will have tribulation and anguish throughout your entire family. In fact, David had a son whose name was Amnon, and he forced his sister to lay with him, Tamar. So you have David's son who forced David's daughter. And I want to tell you something. I've got 3 daughters, and I can't even imagine. A man would lose all his religion if he found out that happened in his family. But David did it to himself. It destroyed him. I think about Samson. It said he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah, and Delilah destroyed Samson. All because of Delilah. Samson had his eyes burned out with hot pokers, and he was blind, and he lost all of his strength that he had before. He was so miserable and tortured by the Philistines that he prayed to God at the end of the book of Judges, and he begged God. He said, Lord, just please give me strength one more time so that I can pull down the walls of this house and destroy myself and everyone else. And God gave him that ability one last time. And he died with all of his enemies surrounding him and his eyes poked out with hot pokers. That moment right there destroyed Samson. So, Jesus he's talking about some deep things. Divorce, teachings on lust. Let's move on to verse 33. This one we wouldn't initially think is serious, but it is very serious. We've got like a couple minutes left. He said, again, you've heard it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but perform unto the Lord all thy oaths. But I say unto you, what? Don't swear at all. You know, in the Old Testament, I believe it's in the book of Leviticus, I'd have to go back and look at it, but they were allowed to do this. They could swear to God to perform something, but if they did not perform it, the punishment was huge. Now, I'd have to go back and look at it to be exact. I wouldn't want to tell it to you right now because I might get it wrong. I think it was death, but I have to go back and look at it. But I do know if they swore something to God, they had to perform that vow. And Jesus said, you've heard that you were allowed to do this, but I'm telling you, it's not a good idea to swear at all. You know, I was thinking about, I wonder in a courthouse when people, you know, they put their hand on the Bible, and I always wonder about that. You know, I think, well, what if you say, you know, I promise to do this? Are you allowed to do that? I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about, but at any rate, we'll come back next time.